1917, Harbour of Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. The First World War was in full swing. The Allied forces relied heavily on shipping routes for supplies, and Halifax's harbour served as a significant transshipment point for goods travelling to Europe. The Norwegian ship SS Imo had sailed from the Netherlands en route to New York to take on relief supplies for Belgium, under the command of Captain Haakon From. The ship arrived in Halifax on December 3 for inspections and spent 2 days in Bedford Basin awaiting refuelling supplies. Though she had been given clearance to leave the port on December 5, Imo's departure was delayed because her coal load did not arrive until late that afternoon. Therefore, the vessel could not depart until the next morning. Meanwhile, the French cargo ship SS Mont-Blanc arrived from New York late on December 5, under the command of Captain Aimé Le Medec. Mont-Blanc was under orders from the French government to carry her cargo from New York City via Halifax to Bordeaux, France. The vessel was fully loaded with the explosives TNT and picric acid, the highly flammable fuel benzol and guncotton. Navigating into or out of the harbour required passing through a channel called the Narrows. Ships exiting the harbour were required to keep on the right side so ships entering the harbour can come through on their right-hand side of the channel. Also, ships were restricted to a speed of 5 knots, 9.3 kilometers per hour or 5.8 miles per hour, within the harbour. SS Imo was granted clearance to leave the harbour at approximately 7:30 on the morning of December 6, with pilot William Hayes on board. The ship entered the Narrows well above the harbour's speed limit in an attempt to make up for the delay. Imo came upon American steamer SS Clara being piloted up the wrong side of the harbour. So Imo had to exit the harbour on the wrong side. Soon afterwards, Imo was forced to head even further towards the wrong side after passing the tugboat Stella Maris, which was travelling up the harbour near mid-channel. Horatio Brannan, the captain of Stella Maris, saw Imo approaching at excessive speed and ordered his ship closer to the western shore to avoid an accident. Meanwhile, outside the harbour, Francis Mackey, an experienced harbour pilot, had boarded Mont-Blanc on the evening of December 5, 1917. He had asked for a guard ship, given Mont-Blanc's cargo, but no protections were put in place. Ships carrying dangerous cargo were not allowed into the harbour before the war, but the risks posed by German submarines had resulted in a relaxation of regulations. Mont-Blanc started moving into the harbour at 7:30 a.m. and was the second ship to enter the harbour after the American steam SS Clara. He first spotted Imo when she was about 1.21 kilometers, 0.75 miles, away and became concerned as her path appeared to be heading towards his ship. Mackey gave a short blast of his ship's signal whistle to indicate that he had the right of way, but was met with 2 short blasts from Imo, indicating that the approaching vessel would not yield its position. The captain ordered Mont-Blanc to halt her engines and angle slightly to right side to avoid the Imo. He let out another single blast of his whistle, hoping the other vessel would likewise move to other side, but was again met with a double blast. Sailors on nearby ships heard the series of signals and, realizing that a collision was imminent, gathered to watch. Both ships had cut their engines by this point, but their momentum carried them towards each other at slow speed. Mackey ordered Mont-Blanc to steer away and crossed the bow of Imo. Narrowly avoiding each other, the 2 ships were almost parallel to each other, when Imo suddenly sent out 3 signal blasts, indicating the ship was reversing its engines. But it caused the ship's head to swing into Mont-Blanc and collided at 8:45 a.m. The damage to Mont-Blanc was not severe, but barrels of deck cargo toppled and broke open. This flooded the deck with benzol that quickly flowed into the hold. Sparks from colocin ignited the vapors from the benzol. Fire traveled quickly up the side of the ship. Surrounded by thick black smoke, and fearing she would explode almost immediately, the captain ordered the crew to abandon ship. The frantic crew of Mont-Blanc shouted from their 2 lifeboats to some of the other vessels that their ship was about to explode, but they could not be heard above the noise and confusion. As the lifeboats made their way across the harbour to the shore, the abandoned ship continued to drift and beach. Towing 2 barges at the time of the collision, Stella Maris, a tugboat, responded immediately to the fire by spraying the burning ship with their fire hose. But they realized that the fire was too intense for their single hose and backed off from the burning Mont-Blanc. At 9:04 a.m., the out-of-control fire on board Mont-Blanc set off her cargo of high explosives. The ship was completely blown apart and a powerful blast wave traveled away from the explosion, initially at more than 1,000 meters, 3,300 feet, per second. Temperatures of 5,000 degrees Celsius 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit and pressures of thousands of atmospheres accompanied the moment of detonation at the center of the explosion. A cloud of white smoke rose to at least 3.6 kilometers or 2.2 miles. The blast was felt as far away as 200 kilometers or 130 miles. An area of over 1.6 square kilometers, 400 acres, was completely destroyed by the explosion, and the harbor floor was for a brief moment of time exposed by the volume of water that was displaced. A tsunami was formed by water surging in to fill the void. It rose as high as 18 meters, 60 feet, above the high water mark on the Halifax side of the harbor. Imo was carried onto the shore at Dartmouth by the tsunami. The blast killed 21 of the 26 men on the tugboat, Stella Maris. All but one of Mont-Blanc's crew members survived. Over 1,600 people were killed instantly and 9,000 were injured, more than 300 of whom later died. Every building within a 2.6 kilometer, 1.6 miles, radius, over 12,000 in total, was destroyed or badly damaged. Hundreds of people who had been watching the fire from their homes were blinded when the blast wave shattered the windows in front of them. Overturned stoves and lamps started fires throughout Halifax, particularly in the North End, where entire city blocks burned, trapping residents inside their houses. The sight was awful, with people hanging out of windows dead, some with their heads missing, and some thrown onto the overhead telegraph wires. Large brick and stone factories near Pier 6, such as the disappeared into unrecognizable heaps of rubble, killing most of their workers. The Nova Scotia cotton mill, located 1.5 kilometer, 0.93 mile, from the blast, was destroyed by fire and the collapse of its concrete floors. The Royal Naval College of Canada building was badly damaged. The Richmond railway yards and station were destroyed, killing 55 railway workers and destroying and damaging over 500 railway cars. Railway dispatcher Patrick Coleman learned of the dangerous cargo aboard the burning Mont-Blanc and sent out urgent telegraph messages to stop the oncoming trains. Coleman's message was responsible for bringing all incoming trains around Halifax to a halt and saving the lives of about 300 railway passengers. Unfortunately, Coleman was killed at his post. Firefighters were among the first to respond to the disaster, rushing to Mont-Blanc to attempt to extinguish the blaze before the explosion even occurred. Halifax Fire Department's West Street Station 2 was the first to arrive at Pier 6 with the crew of Patricia, the first motorized fire engine in Canada. In the final moments before the explosion, hoses were being unrolled as the fire spread to the docks. 9 members of the Halifax Fire Department lost their lives, performing their duty that day. First rescue efforts came from surviving neighbors and co-workers who pulled and dug out victims from buildings. The initial informal response was soon joined by surviving policemen, firefighters, and military personnel who began to arrive, as did anyone with a working vehicle. Cars, trucks and delivery wagons of all kinds were enlisted to collect the wounded. A flood of victims soon began to arrive at the city's hospitals, which were quickly overwhelmed. The new military hospital, Camp Hill, admitted approximately 1,400 victims on December 6. Royal Navy cruisers in port sent some of the first organized rescue parties ashore. Other merchant ships sent boats ashore with rescue parties and medical personnel and soon began to take wounded aboard. U.S. Coast Guard also sent a rescue party ashore. Out at sea, the American cruiser USS Tacoma spotted the large and rising column of smoke. Tacoma altered course and arrived to assist rescue at 2 p.m. The American steamship Old Colony, docked in Halifax for repairs, was quickly converted to serve as a hospital ship, staffed by doctors and orderlies from the British and American Navy vessels in the harbor. Dazed survivors immediately feared that the explosion was the result of a bomb dropped from a German plane. Troops at gun batteries and barracks immediately turned out in case the city was under attack, but within an hour switched from defense to rescue roles as the cause and location of the explosion were determined. All available troops were called in from harbor fortifications and barracks to the north end to rescue survivors and provide transport to the city's hospitals, including the 2 army hospitals in the city. Adding to the chaos were fears of a potential second explosion. A cloud of steam shot out of ventilators at the ammunition magazine at Wellington Barracks as naval personnel extinguished a fire by the magazine. The fire was quickly put out. The cloud was seen from blocks away and quickly led to rumors that another explosion was imminent. Uniformed officers ordered everyone away from the area. As the rumor spread across the city, many families fled their homes. The confusion hampered efforts for over 2 hours until fears were dispelled by about noon. Many rescuers ignored the evacuation, and naval rescue parties continued working uninterrupted at the harbor. Surviving railway workers in the rail yards at the heart of the disaster carried out rescue work, pulling people from the harbor and from under debris. The overnight train from St. John was just approaching the city when hit by the blast. The passengers and soldiers aboard used the emergency tools from the train to dig people out of houses and bandaged them with sheets from the sleeping cars. The train was loaded with injured and left the city at 1:30 with a doctor aboard to evacuate the wounded to Truro. Community facilities like the Young Men's Christian Association, YMCA, were rapidly converted to emergency hospital facilities with medical students providing care. Rescue trains were dispatched from across Atlantic Canada, as well as the northeastern United States. The first left Truro around 10 a.m., carrying medical personnel and supplies, arrived in Halifax by noon and returned to Truro with the wounded and homeless by 3 p.m. To reach the wounded, rescue personnel had to walk through parts of the devastated city until they reached a point where the military had begun to clear the streets. Relief efforts were hampered the following day by a blizzard that blanketed Halifax with 16 inches, 41 centimeters, of heavy snow. Trains en route from other parts of Canada and from the United States were stalled in snowdrifts, and telegraph lines that had been hastily repaired following the explosion were again knocked down. Halifax was isolated by the storm, and while rescue committees were forced to suspend the search for survivors, the storm also aided efforts to put out fires throughout the city. The exact number killed by the disaster is unknown. The Halifax Explosion Remembrance Book, an official database of the Nova Scotia Archives and Records Management, identified 1,782 victims. As many as 1,600 people died immediately in the blast, tsunami, and collapse of buildings. The last body, a caretaker killed at the exhibition grounds, was not recovered until summer 1919. An additional 9,000 were injured. 1,630 homes were destroyed in the explosion and fires, and another 12,000 damaged. Roughly 6,000 people were left homeless and 25,000 had insufficient shelter. The city's industrial sector was in large part gone, with many workers among the casualties and the dockyard heavily damaged. The Halifax explosion was a tragic event, but it also provided valuable lessons in disaster preparedness, community resilience, and the importance of safety regulations in explosive materials management. It forced communities to rethink urban planning in ways that promoted safety and security, highlighting the need for cooperation and collaboration in the face of calamity. So that's all we got about the Halifax explosion, and thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. If you want to see more videos, hit the subscribe button, and if you have something to say, please leave a comment.